Alrighty, so first things first, I have a couple of exciting announcements to get to. The first one is in honor of Valentine's Day. I'm hosting a free webinar on February 14th, so next week, Wednesday, from 11 to 12 Central European Time, all about the art of saying no. So, this is a 60-minute webinar that will explore how the word no is really the ultimate act of self care and self love. I'll also cover subjects such as why it's so hard to say no, what are some of the long term health consequences of not saying no? How to create your no gates and help you determine better when you should say yes and when you should say no to something, and understand the different ways in which you can say no in both your personal and your professional life. If you're unable to join the live session, I will be recording it. So you can make sure that you register anyways. I'll send out the recording and then you can watch the recording in your own time afterwards. You can register on my website or reach out to me on LinkedIn or Instagram, and I will send you the registration page. Also, another piece of announcement. A big part of my business goals for this year is to create things and programs that help cultivate community support for people who are tackling certain challenges in their lives. That means that in a couple of weeks, or in about a week or so, I'm going to be opening up registrations for the first ever Bloom Group Coaching Program. So, this is a 6-week program that is designed to empower women on a transformative journey of self discovery, of confidence building, and learning how to embrace their own unique and inner beauty. So there will be an in-person option for women located in and around Munich and an online option for those not based in Munich. So if you would like to join the wait list so you can stay up to date on all of the dates, the times, and the pricing, you can find more information on my website or on Instagram or LinkedIn. Finally, I do have a couple more one-on-one coaching slots available for this quarter. So if you've been feeling lost or uncertain as to what your next steps might be, or you are trying to craft a better vision for how you want your life to look in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, or if you're finally ready to tackle some of the things that are holding you back internally from achieving your goals, I'd love to schedule a free 45-minute consultation. You can either contact me through Substack, through my website, or on Instagram and LinkedIn as well. Okay, now back to the content. So this week's post is about grief. A little over a week ago, I lost my grandfather at the ripe old age of 93. He would have been 94 on Saturday. And I had just seen him a few weeks ago when I was visiting Colorado. However, the last time I saw him, we both knew that it would be the last time we would see each other in this lifetime, at least. Even though his passing was expected and it was peaceful, and we could do nothing more than celebrate the long, beautiful life that my grandfather had lived, grief was and is still present. And it really got me reflecting a lot on the important role that grief plays in life. So, in response, I wrote a post on LinkedIn and Instagram on the importance of making and creating space for grief that received really just this outpour of kindness and genuine, thoughtful comments from friends and strangers alike, really wishing me and my family both healing. And it reminded me so much of how experiences like grief really connects us all. And when someone has the courage to be vulnerable in their grief, it actually gives others permission to do the same. Those posts are what inspired this newsletter, an in depth look at the importance of grief and how we can create more room and space in our lives for the healing power of grief. As always, you can watch it or read it. I deeply appreciate you taking the time to read, comment, and share with your friends. Feedback and topic suggestions or a little note are always, always, always welcome. I really, really take those in and receive them. And until then, I hope you enjoy this piece. I will never forget the first time I was confronted with death. My childhood dog, Zach, had just died. And I remember the soul crushing grief that took over me as a little kid. I remember curling up in his old bed, tears streaming down my face for what seemed like hours. And as a little girl with very big feelings, it was so hard to manage. In between then, I did experience other deaths: the death of my grandmother, the untimely deaths of old high school acquaintances, the death of an ex boyfriend shortly after we broke up. However, while all extremely sad, I was not overcome with that wave of intense grief that I had first experienced. Then, 3 years ago, my grandmother passed away after a multi-year battle with lung cancer. And I will never forget the final conversation I had with her. I felt like I was stuck 1,000 miles away when all I wanted to do was be there next to her, holding her hand. She could barely hold the phone up for a phone call, but I didn't need to see her to feel the deep sadness that she had. She knew her time on this earth was coming to an end. "I'm so sorry it has to be this way, Kelsey," she said to me. And with tears streaming down my face, just as they are now, I looked at her through the phone and I said, "It's okay, Grammy. We're all going this way." It was one of the hardest conversations I've ever had in my life. As I hung up the phone, a wave of intense grief overcame me. I threw down my phone and I ran to the bathroom, wrenched open the toilet, and dry heaved several times. Yet nothing came out. And it was, to this day, one of the most intense emotional experiences I have ever had. I've only ever touched that level of pain and grief one other time in my life. And it was during a solo mushroom ceremony in the forest. When I went into the pain and grief I felt as a child for growing up different in this world. I call this pain the deep pain. This almost visceral gut punch of an emotion that is enough to force even the strongest person to their knees. This is the power of grief. It can knock you completely off your center and throw you so far away from yourself that it can take days, weeks, months, even years to find your way back. It can feel like it's going to consume you, to swallow you whole. It can also rot you from the inside out. Grief is one of those emotions that we're never taught to deal with, because how could anyone possibly prepare you for the experience of it? And yet, it's something that each and every one of us will face at some point in our lives. That being said, we actually experience grief more often than you might think. Sometimes it manifests as other emotions: sadness, disappointment, remorse, heartache. However, in the end, it's all grief, a deep sadness for the loss of someone or something. Grief is intertwined with death. And death, no matter how much we want to ignore it, is actually all around us. I don't just mean the very fact that each and every one of us is simply one step away from death at any moment, but I mean this natural cycle of birth, death, and birth that life brings us. We see this cycle every day as the sun rises and sets. We see this in the chapters of our lives. We see this as we end an old job and start a new one, as we say goodbye to an old city and the start of a new life when we move across the country. We see it as we move through the phases of falling in love, breaking up, starting a family, kids moving out, starting a career, ending a career, changing a career. The Buddhists say that we even experience birth and death with each inhale and exhale. With each inhale, we're born again. And with each exhale, the moment dies, and we are reminded to let go. If only it were that simple, to simply experience death as it is and let go. Rarely does that happen. When we experience a loss, whether it's a loss of a loved one, loss of a dream, loss of an idea or an amazing opportunity, a life that could have been, adventures or experiences that will never come to fruition, we're tempted to hang on and struggle to preserve what once was or the idea of what could have been. This struggle and resistance causes pain. It causes discomfort, and it requires us to begin a process of letting go and acceptance. This is the role of grief. The problem, though, is that it's not often we create space for grief in our lives. Grief naturally makes us really uncomfortable. It's hard to know sometimes what to do or how to act when someone is in the midst of grief, much less know what to do or how to act when we ourselves are feeling grief. It's also tempting to hide these sad emotions away from the view of others. We think thoughts like, well, what if they think I'm weak? Or what if they see me as too emotional? Or what if I'm taking up too much space with my grief? What if someone sees this crack in my facade and as a result, they see all of my cracks? We're basically told to leave grief behind closed doors, to not let it bother us, to push our emotions away and distract ourselves with work or other things. But by not engaging in the grieving process, we're preventing ourselves from being reborn again and from moving towards the next death, the next loss, but also the next rebirth. So, how do we make more space for grief in our lives? Well, it first starts with acknowledging all of the ways in which grief is a natural part of the human experience. It starts with not shying away from those hard emotions, but from trusting that they won't consume us or pull us under. So we don't really need to fight them when they come. It also starts with giving ourselves the permission to grieve, to practice actively going into the grief intentionally and consciously, because we know that this is where our healing actually begins. We then need to express the grief so that we can allow that energy to flow. Activities like writing in a journal, writing a letter, creating art, creating a ritual, dancing, running, crying, painting, whatever that activity might be that will allow you to release and process the emotions are all ways that can help you move through the grief. For me, art, writing like this, poetry are all ways that I get in touch with my grief. For others, it might be going on a run, sitting with that emotion, or listening to a sad song. The important thing is to allow the emotion to move. So get up, walk around, dance, and let the energy flow. Sometimes we need to express the grief by reaching out to others to share in our experience. This can help us feel connected and less alone. So take time to share or not share about your grieving process. And if you're on the receiving end of someone else's grief, try to avoid the temptation to intervene in the grief because you're intervening in their healing process. Instead, you just have to simply be there with that person, helping them create the space for the grief to just simply be. Finally, setting those boundaries with others to take care of yourself, both physically and mentally, when you need the space to grieve is an essential part. Taking time away from work or distractions to just sit with emotions, and yet also allowing flexibility to return to these places of quiet contemplation. Grief and healing come in waves, so they also often require patience and self-compassion. So while it's natural to want to run away from grief, I often remind myself that where there was grief, there had to have been love. Grief is the price we pay for love. You had to have loved that person who passed away in order to grieve them. You had to have cared deeply about that person that you're no longer with. You had to have been excited about something if you're sad when it doesn't come to fruition. You had to have loved that chapter in your life to be sad that it's coming to an end. To grieve is an act of celebration for all things lost and all things that could have been. So while these emotions of grief feel heavy and sometimes unbearable, let this be a reminder of the love that you once had and the life and light that that love brought to you. Death and grief are not things to shy away from. They are the very things that remind us to live, that remind us to love, and that remind us to remain grateful for the temporary nature of everything. So, Grandpa, this writing is my celebration of the 32 years of love that you and I had together. For the moments in the garden, picking carrots, to all the giggles from sticking that stuffed toy bunny in your front breast pocket, to the countless Christmases, birthdays, singing recitals, piano recitals, graduations, and for our final moments together, holding hands and singing covers of classic 50s songs. I will cherish those memories for the rest of my life.